Okay. I'm actually going to try something a bit interesting here. I'm going to try explaining the new and revised history of the life of Midlon the Conqueror, the kind of first proper Antramarian emperor. Because I'm changing some things up, and I think this will be the best method to explain those changes. Maybe at some point I'll do a direct comparison between the old and new, but I'll explain the largest changes as I'm going. Um, so we'll start out here with the kingdom of Antramar. Um, Obviously not doing bad. Been around for about 250 years. Rivals with the Umasians for a while. Uh, Ally and friend to Antaz and Ebasan before they were collectively ruined by Malkarak. But now they have a huge influx of new migrants. They've stuffed their ranks with them, and Midlon has been contacted by 4 Ebasani Magi calling themselves prophets, who have told him that he basically has to go on a mission of holy reconquest. And so he accepts that mantle and, the great base that he has, and decides to start going on the march. So first off, we see that he conquers the Nexoni, which have been a long-standing thorn in the side of the Antramarian state at this point for a while. Basically, just kind of the last remnant of native Tridentine forces that have been kind of resisting Antramarian subjugation. Well, not the last, but the last two are much less relevant, and we'll get into that. It's the rest of the southern half of Hasael. Same type of notion. Basically, these are all just kind of little holdouts of remaining native Aphalian culture, which was trying to resist being integrated into the Antramarian state, which had more of an Azerite, kind of twist to it with the Astar lineage. Same thing with Grain. Just similar kind of. Grain would have been more of a rebellious colony than it would have been a Aphalian Nexoni state, and we'll see many more of those. Next up would be the conquest of, or the march through Geldria, rather. A lot of these closer states, like Nexon, would have been the greatest rival that so far the Midland has actually put down. They were the only one that had been kind of an enduring irritant and lingering undealt with grudge that the Antramarians had had for some time. But with them dealt with the south of Hasael, Garain, and now Geldria, we're all already basically in the Antramarian sphere of influence, but Midland is basically just marching through them and ensuring that they know their place, so to speak. Next up, we have this would be very similar to Geldria. I'm not even sure, you couldn't really call this an invasion. This is basically, Waven was settled as an Antramarian colony, and so this is basically just reasserting influence over the region because it had become a bit wayward in the years. Then marching up down the Yardam coast, we see a similar story. All of these settlements in the far east, they might have started to have a decent bit of Ravenian influence because Ravenia had become, a somewhat influential eastern kingdom at this point, and so you might have seen Ravenia encroaching on those colonies. But then, as we see here, I guess it's not right now, but it'll be coming up. Now this is a new one, actually. This is one of the new changes, is that I'm actually having the Antramarians do an early sponsorship of the region of Daramar, which is kind of in the north of Grail, of Graelia and Stania. And the big thing is that at this time, the south of Graelia had been almost entirely conquered by Halasi forces coming from Eophora. And so this last little remnant up in the foothills and mountains up in the north of the peninsula were kind of the last remnant of that southern Ebasoni remnant state, which had come out of the Civil War and the ruin of Malkarak. And so Daramar was now being, we'll say, sponsored by Antramar to allow them to resist better against the Halasi who were trying to push further north, obviously. So this is the first instance where it's like this isn't exactly necessarily a direct occupation, but it is definitely an alliance between this realm of Daramar, the north of Stania, and the ambitious Antramarian state under Midlund. So now we see one of the bigger immediate conquests, or not even, again, a lot of these are not so much conquest, so to speak. That is a theme I'm keeping, even with the new ascension of the Antramarian state throughout Midland's life, is that these aren't necessarily conquests. In the case of Ravinia, I'm keeping the motif of Charlemagne, known as Charlemagne the Weak or Charlemagne the Pious, depending on your inclination, who essentially was a king of Ravinia, who heard about the prophecy that was being touted about Midland, and basically said, "Oh, you clearly are the heir of Sentinus," and submitted his kingdom to him as a vassal, basically on the spot. But again, and the reason why this action is debated between being a pious one or a cowardly one is because, pious in the sense that he might have truly believed him to be the heir of Sentinus, cowardly in that he might have just instantly felt meek and submitted before this clearly greater ruler, or potentially very savvy in that by submitting himself to Antramar, he knew that he was placing himself under the protection of a state that might actually be able to weather the storm of the coming Ustigradians, which we'll get into very shortly. So we see just kind of tidying up some of the Ravinian holdovers as well, and kind of firming up the links between the core land and the new Ravinian client kingdom. And now we see those aforementioned Ostigradians taking obviously a big chunk out of Ravinia during their kind of lightning campaign, where they basically pushed through Grugland, sacked Grugland, and immediately taken and pushed into Lunsk and seized all of Sirch after taking the Sirch king Sharzan in a battle as captive, and essentially using him as a bartering ship to force the Sirch to fight for them. So now we see they've used that to great effect. They've pushed and continue to push the Antramarians out of Ravinia. Again, at this point, this is all happening kind of very quickly because Midland's force was crushed at the Battle of Canley and is essentially on a desperate retreat all throughout the Ravinian countryside until they get to Druid's Woods here in around Aethelsmark. And this is where we obviously have the decisive battle where the Galens from the north come down and decisively crush the Ustigradians, killing Varus himself and allowing Midland to quickly regain the offensive momentum after being reinforced from his forces. So now we see, obviously, very quickly they retake all their Ravinian provinces, and then we see they kind of connect through Miramar and Onodavia and kind of connect their empire a little bit as they're pushing more and more into Sirch and driving the Ostigradians out. Although one big change here is that they won't fully drive the Ostigradians out, and I'll show you what I mean. So here is where I've added in a section where a famous Antramarian hero, basically known as the Bird, will do a daring prison rescue of Sharzan Lundagan, who is the Sirch king, or Archon, rather. He will free him, and in thanks, the Sirch king will help his people to rise up and cast out the Ostigradians and essentially submit himself in fealty, similar to how Charlemagne did. But in this case, he's got a bit more to actually be thankful for. He's freed from prison. And then now, as another condition of Sharzan's capitulation and submission, he would insist that after recovery period, that Midland would go to or enter conflict with the Halasi and attempt to liberate the southern Edesani, who had been subjugated under Halasi rule for a while now. And that's what he does. After a delay, he'll push in, and then a very famous battle that I'm going to be writing about, which is the Battle of the Epoch River over here, which is the only time for another around 6 ages that we see a large clash of these two empires. After this battle, all future conflicts, like this battle essentially decides that Antramar will have dominion over the southern Edesani kingdom. There's still a fairly big remnant of Halasi influence, but they'll be they will very quickly become their own thing for a bit. But this will ensure that Antramar has influence over this region of southern Edesan. And that battle, the Battle of the Epoch River, will essentially decide that, and will also kind of mark
a point where Halassi and Antramarian relations will be not amicable, but filled with a begrudged respect for one another that essentially uh, has them both acknowledging that they are the rightful claimants of a shared prophecy, that there would be, holy reconquerors who would be fighting for the restoration of Azor. Obviously, they would both see themselves as the true inheritors of that title of holy conqueror, but there would be a begrudged acknowledgement that this was kind of the straits here, were the division of their respective conquests. And so there would be many, many small, more skirmishing battles, particularly over Skesia and the northern coast of Eofor over here, in Ferocia and Darikos and Decacia, for sure. But
They would never be as large a battle as the Battle of the Epoch River. Large or decisive of a battle between those two forces for a while. And yeah, this is where I'm thinking we have Midlon go out. So far from the. It's certainly a continent-spanning empire, but it's not quite as universally dominant over the continent of Athlon yet. And I'm going to kind of leave that further
extension up to some competent historian heirs, and have some missteps by some not so competent historian heirs that also kind of impede and slow that progress. So I'll be drawing out the historian period of Antramarian history quite a bit until we get to the period of the interregnum before the Arthurs. But yeah, that's the new plan for a Midlonian Antramar. And that's what we're looking like, and I might do this again for further progress. Fuck you.